Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to the third day of ProMat Automate. We've got a absolutely jam-packed day today, starting out with this illustrious panel, which I'll introduce in a moment here. But before I do that, I just wanted to touch on a couple things, remind you that you've got one badge and two shows. On the ProMat side, we've got 807 exhibitors and 340,000 square feet. On the Automate side, we've got another 300 exhibitors and 83,000 square feet. So 1,100 exhibitors and over 420,000 square feet of solutions, innovations, and ideas for you. So if you've come here with what's keeping you up at night, you've come to the right place. My name is George Preston. I'm the CEO of MHI, and we are the sponsor of this, of ProMat and this keynote. This morning, we've got a panel, and we're pleased to be introducing the annual report. But before I explain, or we get into the annual report, what I'd like to do is give you a little background of why an annual report. In 2013, MHI sponsored 4 regional roundtables, one in Washington, D.C., one in Atlanta, one in Chicago, and one in Los Angeles. And we had over 100 government, academia, industry, and end-user experts just get together and talk about what's the future of our industry? Where are we going to be in 2025? So after we did that, we compiled that and came out with the U.S. Material Handling and Logistics Roadmap, which is a wonderful document, and you can find it on at www.mhi.org if you'd like to download that. But okay, so now we've got this vision. We didn't want it to just be one of those reports that you do and then you put it on the shelf and everybody goes, nice report. So the thought was, why not do an annual report and in essence have that become the mile marker on how are these what's actually happening, what's getting traction, what are the technologies that really are being implemented in our industry. And so in collaboration with Deloitte, we went out and we did a, did a survey. And in that survey, the demographics of the survey, there were over 400 respondents from different company types, industry sectors, and levels. The majority of the participants, 57%, are executives holding the title of CEO, Executive Vice President, General Manager. The survey highlights 5 supply chain realities and 8 technologies. And it identifies the trends and technologies that are actually getting traction. So today, it's my pleasure, we thought, let's get some panelists, some professionals that are actually out there living this stuff. And so today, what I'd like to do is introduce the panel, and I'd like to thank them ahead of time for being here and sharing their experiences with us, and I think it'll add a lot of value to what we're about to introduce to you. So on my left, in the first chair, is Bill Abernathy. Bill is the head of North American Product Supply Logistics Excellence for Bayer Crop Science. Randolph Bradley, Technical Fellow, Supply Chain Management, The Boeing Company. Brian Hancock, Senior Vice President, Supply Chain, Family Dollar Stores. John Hill,
Morning.
St. Onge Company, Director. Jonathan Rader, Manager of Design Engineering, FedEx SmartPost. Art Romaine, Director, Design and Construction for U.S. Foods. And Greg Schweer, Vice President of Research and Development, La-Z-Boy, Inc. And to my left, helping me moderate today, is Scott Sofer, who's the principal and leader of Deloitte Consulting Supply Chain and Manufacturing Operations Practice. Scott was the partner in charge that helped us put this report together, so he's going to team with me in terms of moderating this illustrious panel. And Scott, why don't you kick it off?
All right, thank you, George.
Good morning, everybody. So what's the report and survey reveal? A couple things. One, supply chains continue to face constant pressure to do more with less as consumers demand a better, faster, and cheaper experience. Traditional supply chains are undergoing rapid transformation, and that will radically change over the next 5 to 10 years into next generation models. And finally, firms that embrace this transformation today and focusing on investing in these new technologies will be better positioned to compete and thrive in the future. This year's survey, as George mentioned, identified 5 supply chain realities that are impacting supply chain. One, it's about the customer experience. Customer service is driving more and more in terms of how supply chains respond today. The alignment between supply chain and customer needs is paramount, probably more so than ever before. Collaboration is critical as supply chains boundaries blur. There seems to be more and more collaboration across the end-to-end supply chain. Traditional cost-cutting strategies, I don't think we'll cut it anymore, that you need to look at it more holistically around these solutions. And the workforce crisis is real, and quite frankly, I think with all these with these new technologies, it only adds to the challenge that we have. As George mentioned, the survey focused on 8 technologies identified by the U.S. Roadmap for Material Handling and Logistics that are driving next-generation supply chains. It's interesting that the survey found that 75% of the respondents believe one of these 8 technologies either could be a source of competitive advantage or disruption over the next 5 to 10 years. And we grouped these 8 technologies into 3 categories: maturing, growth, and emerging, based on current adoption levels and anticipated adoption over the next 5 years. Sorry about that. So let's talk about the first category, which is maturing technologies. In this group includes inventory and network optimization tools, sensors and automatic identification, cloud computing and storage, robotics and automation. And you can see that it ranges between 35 and 50% adoption today, with around a 10 to 15% annual CAGR going forward. The second group is the growth technologies, which is growing, which has an adoption about 20–25% today based on the survey, but with much more significant growth, about 20 to 25% CAGR over the next 3 to 5 years. And in this group, we see predictive analytics and wearable and mobile technology. And then the final category is what we're calling emerging technologies. Only about 10 to 15% adoption today, but with accelerated growth. And in this category, we see 3D printing as well as driverless vehicles and drones. So let's start with maturing technologies identified in the report. And Bill will open up the discussion. Brian, excuse me, will open up the discussion with you. Our survey highlighted a trend towards increasing innovation in our industry. What's driving this trend?
Thanks, Scott. I think from an innovation perspective, when you look at our industry, there's not a lot of other industries that are facing the type of change that we are. Consumers have changed the way they think about order fulfillment. They think about how they shop. I have 4 daughters. They do not shop the same now that they did just 10 years ago. And so you think about all of the different things that we're doing. Also, I think organizations are looking at asset utilization and the concept of omni-channel. They don't just have to use their own assets. They look at anybody's assets. So you think about the agreements that have been made with the Postal Service. Amazon taps into warehouses wherever they need to. I think it's amazing. You start thinking about the technologies of driverless vehicles in an era when we don't have enough drivers. People are going to push that. And so you start thinking about all of the different things that we as an industry have to deal with to take care of the new customer need. Customers have just changed. They think about things differently, and as they evolve, we're going to evolve. And the question is, I think if you go up to the show, I mean, there's so many amazing things. You kind of have to question yourself, where do I start? What do I do? But I would tell you, I think our industry over the next decade is going to be something that's just fabulous to watch. because it's going to encase everything that we have ever thought about as a supply chain industry.
Great, thanks. How are customer demands evolving? John, you want to take that one?
Philosophically, Scott, George, panel, nothing has changed in the last 50 years. I've heard about faster, better. I've heard about faster, better, cheaper since I entered the industry, and I won't tell you when I did that. The difference is, as Brian suggests, the incredible number of new tools and technologies that continue to evolve and appear. 1,100 exhibitors upstairs here. And a group of customers whose level of expectation has been fueled by the internet and a variety of other things that have turned your daughters into different kinds of people.
Expensive people.
People expect on-time delivery. They expect to order a product and have it delivered not tomorrow or the next day, but even today in Silicon Valley. One of the major retailers is now offering 1-hour service for online purchases. And that's driving everybody else.
Great. Hey, Bill, how can companies meet the challenges of their customers' ever-rising expectations for faster response times?
So I can't be trumped by a story about shopping. So I'll tell my own story about shopping. Who was here in the 70s? Give me a show of hands. This is the audience participation piece, right? Who likes music and used to buy albums? How did you know when a new album was coming out? Maybe you saw it in a publication from different music things. Maybe you heard about it hanging out at the record store or the head shop.
Right.
John?
You got it.
Maybe you did. That's the way we bought music back in the 70s and 80s. In October, I received a Google alert. I received a Twitter alert. Things started hitting my Facebook page to say, one of your favorite bands is coming out with a new disc. It's not out yet, but you can pre-order it today, and we will guarantee delivery March 24th. Who wants to tell me what came on March 24th? Work with me on this, work with me, work with me. On March 24th, that CD that I ordered in October, that I ordered prior production, prior the interviews, prior all the cool stuff that's in there other than just the music, showed up at my house March the 24th. How did that happen? Predictive analytics, massive supply chain. They wanted to create their own demand. They wanted to have a real forecast so that they could take that and build the product that everybody wanted on time, on quality, and hopefully within scope. That's where we're headed. It's no longer nice to have. I no longer stand in line outside of the record shop, in line in the rain, trying to get my latest album. The world knows what I like. They know what I want. They will deliver it to me as long as I say yes. We, supply chain gurus, need to understand that's the new world. That's where we need to dance, and that's where we're going to be successful.
Okay, great. The report showed that although holding inventory can be an effective way to buffer against uncertainty, it's also expensive. And while emerging technologies can help supply chain leaders make better decisions about when inventory buffers can be deployed most effectively. So, Randolph, can you kind of tackle that one?
Sure. My colleague, John Hill, mentioned the plethora of new tools available. At the Boeing Company, I'm a technologist, and my job is to look at the holistic integration of distribution network optimization to determine stocking locations, statistical demand forecasting to come up with the best estimate of future requirements, inventory optimization to minimize inventory levels, hold less inventory, tactical day-to-day decision support tools, and warehouse management systems to effectively manage physical goods. looking to tomorrow's tools, I'm actually partnering with the University of Arkansas on a couple of National Science Foundation studies. One is looking at inventory segmentation methods for large-scale manufactured systems, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to cookbook our approach to consumable parts. The other is on building innovation capacity for performance-based logistics systems using reliable approximate computing, which again is a fancy way of saying we want to take some computer shortcuts to really speed up the calculation time of our optimizations. And the report mentions that a lot of these new technologies are going to find their ways to the cloud, and sure enough, we're developing these technologies. We'll put them out on the cloud. It makes it very easy to update software, and then anybody with a data set can actually upload the data. Our software crunches it, and they can get the results. Now, looking into the future, I really think that this expensive software is going to go the way of accounting software. Peachtree Accounting, which used to be a $5,000 package, is now a $500 package, competing with other tools like QuickBooks. And I think in maybe 5 or maybe 10 years, but this supply chain software eventually will be a commodity so that you don't have to be a large company like a Boeing with $1 million implementation budget. You can be a smaller company and give it to Bill, the next cubicle over, to do an implementation.
We appreciate you being on the front edge of that.
Right. You have some scared vendors out there. So, what other maturing technologies are being used? Jonathan?
Sure. Automation is going to be key, and that's obvious. We have a lot of automation now, automated sortation, automated retrieval, things of that nature. That technology is going to continue to evolve. In fact, you can see examples of that on the show floor right now. It's going to continue to become better, faster, cheaper, as John mentioned. I think you're also going to start to see a level of automation in areas where we don't see it currently, so it will become more prevalent. The real growth engine, though, is going to come from automating processes within these buildings. Robotics certainly has a play with that. Maybe the automation is going to augment the capabilities of the person that is stationed there, or in some cases maybe replace that person altogether so that they can move to a different area of the warehouse or distribution center to a more critical process. It's a catch-22, though. By putting this type of technology in place, we're creating a need for engineers and technicians that can program and maintain this equipment, and those positions are not very prevalent today. It also brings the question, where do these people come from? And we'll talk about the workforce shortage in a little bit, but we could be creating an entirely new service and support industry here. Maybe there are third parties that come in and do the things that these technicians and engineers used to do in-house, so we'll have to wait and see.
Great. What should supply chain leaders be doing today regarding these maturing technologies? Greg?
I think the main thing is just get started, to really jump in and understand how to align the company's capabilities with the customer's needs, and really not be afraid of it, and start at the appropriate level of investment, because it, like you said, Bill, and I think Randolph, if a company's small, they can't invest in these massive systems and equipment. So it has, really the size of the investment is proportional to the size of the company. So I think it's be appropriate with your expense and where you're going to, and be very wise in how you align with your customers so that you put the money in the right place to get the best value from the investment. So understand all the factors that go into that production facility, ship to locations. All of us know those kind of parameters that we have to understand. So I think it's get started, start at the appropriate size, and then just kind of learn, embed, and really start to create the recurring and the competency of the organization to develop it and mature it. Because a lot of times, ideas are easy, implementation and execution is tough. Right. And I think that's where it's going to come back to technicians and engineers and people that can maintain and keep the equipment moving and going. And that's really critical. So I think it's not only get started with understanding your plan, but also how you're going to manage that plan on an ongoing basis.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Let's jump to growth technologies.
Okay, so now with regard to growth technologies, there were 2 technologies that were identified: predictive analytics and wearable and mobile technology. Brian, maybe you could give us a little insight on how these are being used based on your experience.
Sure, yeah, I think the the number one thing that's really impacting us is predictive analytics. You think about the way we take orders in today's world. I always use the example of Brooks Brothers shirts. I only wear one kind of shirt because I'm not a fashion guy. I just like blue and white, and I know what size it is.
You look pretty good to me.
Thank you.
Found some purple too.
But you know, I go out to brooksbrothers.com and I log in. They bring up blue and white in my size. First thing I see. But then they have like 3 different types of ties that somebody says, hey, our people said these ties might go well with, and I don't know ties. My wife and my girls like to go buy the ties, but it's interesting that they know exactly what I'm buying. They know when I'm buying it. And then you think about, you know, as a supply chain person, you click on that button, you think about all the processes that start in place. They're predicting, okay, what's the demand for that? Where do I need to have that inventory? How fast can I get them to them? Are they willing to pay more for me to deliver it tomorrow versus 3 days from now? You start thinking about omni-channel and saying, okay, where's all that inventory sit? Can I pull it from here? Is it system fill? Is it facing fill? All of those different ideas are really driven by predictive analytics. So you think about the level of intellect that our folks are going to need, the ability to do Six Sigma analysis, to do lean analysis so that you manage variation out, but also eliminate the waste. I don't think you can be a jack of one trade anymore in the supply chain. Really, you will not be successful. And so the breadth of the analysis, the breadth of the experience has to continue to grow. And it's going to be amazing once, I mean, we know everything about almost every consumer. We know how they pay, where they pay. Predictive analytics to me is just the number one thing that's going to drive change in the supply chain.
Great, thank you. Wearable and mobile technology have achieved moderate levels of adoption and growth. They're anticipating, according to the report, 20 to 25% growth expected over the next 3 to 5 years. Randolph, what are the current and emerging applications at the Boeing company that you're seeing?
Well, today we're using wearable technologies like Google Glass and Copland GoldenEye on the factory floor, and we think this could be a real game changer. One example is for making wire bundles. We have an assembly technician that needs to insert pins into a connector, and this becomes the backbone that wires an aircraft. And it's critical to get, obviously, the right wires and the right pins. But if any of you have looked at, like me, an old paper phone book, and then you go to the phone, by the time you get to the phone, you've forgotten the number. And with the Google Glass, a technician can actually be looking in front of them at a wire connector. They can look at the pinouts. They have a question on a particular pin. They can call out the pin number, all while working in front of them on the assembly. And this greatly speeds the turnaround time and improves product quality. I think tomorrow the big application is going to be in maintenance. I should mention I'm a maintenance guy at Boeing, so I've sort of got a one-track mind here. But we can replace the old paper or electronic technical manuals with an electronic manual in Google Glass, and the technician no longer has to get up from under the belly of an aircraft to do repairs. If you need a particular part, you can call out a specific part number because it's right up there in front of you and have it pulled from the supply while you continue working on the aircraft. It's just a fabulous application. And then looking into the future, Boeing is actually teaming with Virginia Tech to investigate the health and safety applications of these wearable technologies. Virginia Tech is focusing on order picking. We've seen how many order picking systems that are out there already on the ProMat floor. Boeing's into maintenance and manufacturing. And we're worried about, is there a possibility of the same tragic consequences as texting while driving with these wearable technologies? We want to make sure we understand the safety applications.
All right, good.
Well, as a road warrior, I'm really happy to hear that pin's going in the right spot. I'm sure many of you out there are too. So what should leaders be doing today regarding these growth technologies? Brian and John, maybe you could give us a little insight.
Go ahead, John.
Well, one thought for certain. I look back a while, and I'm going to ask the audience a question. I can almost see you from here. How many of you are currently using barcoding? I'm not going to ask the rest of you why not. But the first application or deployment of that technology was in 1971 at General Motors, at least for industrial purposes, warehousing, distribution, production, and the like. And I'd wager today that the audience is representative. Less than 65% of the nation's warehouses and DCs today are using that technology. So let's not scuttle those technologies that are allegedly at the tipping point, because there's a lot of opportunity to deploy them properly. Now, how do you do it? Get back to basics. Before you look at technology or any of the tools covered in the report, or many of the tools covered on the floor upstairs, take a look at your processes. Take a look at the way you move materials. Determine whether or not simple fixes can improve your overall configuration of a warehouse or a distribution center. Fine-tune that, and then begin to take a look at what you might deploy in terms of both mature technologies, growing technologies, emerging technologies, and the like.
That's a really good point. And to Greg's point, where do you start? Yeah. That's a good place to start.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I think if I were to say what should a leader do, the most important thing you can do is educate your mind and educate your team. Just walking through the show, you can get probably, at least, if you don't come out with at least 15 or 20 different ideas that could apply in whatever industry you're in, and you start thinking about, okay, what if I took this problem and I went at it to really understand what I need to do? What are the analytics that it's going to take? What drives the demand of that product? Are your people being educated in mathematics, quantitative analysis, and how to get after the data? Because it's, supply chain is one of those things where it's driven significantly by math. Yeah. And I think sometimes we think that you have to be an engineer. I mean, you don't have to be the smartest person in the world to go through a Greenbelt class and understand how to manage variation. Once the people inside a warehouse can manage variation, they will recognize, boy, this would be a great spot to have a robot. Mm-hmm. We did this in the McDonald's system when I was working for Martin Brower. We found a robot that could handle French fries. 30% of everything that goes through the McDonald's system is French fries. The robot handled French fries in a way that we got a 10% yield increase by not crushing them, by throwing the boxes of French fries.
Well, it's because they weren't eating them.
They're eating them now. But it's, I think it's that where we took a very slim slice, had a group that really understood that particular product, and they started. And now there's a number of different options that have come out of that. And I think we see that in the retail space. You see it in point of sale. And it's just making sure that your team has a broad enough exposure to what's possible so that when they find that little niche, they say, boy, I saw a tool that might help us with that. And then your team can start there, and it can broaden from that point.
Here.
Very good.
Great. Let's jump to kind of the third category, which was emerging technologies. The report showed that these emerging technologies are on the upswing, even though current adoption kind of hovers around 10%. Probably the hottest topic in manufacturing these days is 3D printing. The report, MHI's report, shows that current applications, though limited, tend to be kind of more relevant in specific industries. Randolph, I know that you have a lot of both personal and professional experience with 3D printing. Maybe you could comment and give us your take on the topic.
I'd be delighted to, Scott. And let me discuss that in context of a project I'm working on with Professor Tadashi Tokieda of University of Cambridge in England. This project is called a rattleback. Professor likes to look at science toys to enable us to experience science through the eyes of a child. And it's designed this rattleback, which if you spin it one direction, spins freely. If you turn it over, spin it in the same direction because of conservation of momentum, it actually starts wiggling, stops, and rattles back in the opposite direction. So let me explain this to you how I was explained it and see if you can picture what I'm describing. So Professor Tokieda said, x squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared plus z squared over c squared equals 1, where a is greater than b is greater than c.
You've all got that, right?
Okay. So
Wait
I'm
a minute, you
picturing-
guys told me there'd be no math.
I'm out of
Homework
here.
assignment.
So I'm picturing an equation on a piece of paper. A University of California, Berkeley professor drew an oval on a piece of paper and says, well, Randolph, this is the equation of an ellipsoid. It's like this oval only in 3 dimensions. So I'm like, okay, kind of like a football, but with rounded corners. So now you've all got a mental image. Some of you are probably jumping back to a Sunday night football game, except for those of you who are European relatives and are picturing a soccer ball, but that's okay. But what we really need is sort of a model, a physical prototype, and that's what 3D printing is all about. So picture this mental image you have. Just raise your hand if you're thinking anything that remotely looks like this. That's what I thought. But now everybody in the room, even though this is a distance, can see this little plastic 3D printed rattleback, and you've all got some idea of what I'm talking about, and that's what's so great about 3D printing. It's a great way to show form, fit, and function. Now, I learned a lot of things about 3D printing with this project. For one, 3D printing is anything but fast. It took me 3 weeks to learn the CAD/CAM system to design this model. It took 8 hours to print the blue half. Then we ran out of filament and took another 8 hours for the black half. 3D printing actually prints a shell. So if you want a volume, you have to create a different model. And because of the way I did the stitching, the surface finish actually was impacted by how the 3D printer generates the shell. And then at the end of the day, what we have is a nice plastic object. But what we really wanted was something out of wood, like this nice walnut ellipsoid. So if materials are important, we can't print wood, at least today. And by the way, there's metal inside, and so we can't print dissimilar materials with 3D printing either. So where does that bring us to Boeing? Well, actually, there are a lot of analogies, because if you think of an aircraft, it's got a lot of very high-performance metal parts. If these parts fail, very bad things can happen. I know you're road warriors, and you'll be reassured to know that every time we change a manufacturing process, we requalify the part with a new part number, so you need an entire engineering team doing the structural analysis, strength analysis, testing. So this idea of just 3D printing spare parts, well, it ain't going to happen anytime soon in aerospace. But that being said, we've got a lot of good applications. One is for out-of-production parts, particularly at the depot level, where you have a multi-million-dollar aircraft stuck, missing a part. Well, maybe all of a sudden it's okay to have a team of engineers that can design and fully qualify a new part with a printing method if that part is available in weeks rather than months. Boeing also is doing a lot of research into metal 3D printing. And in fact, we've got a couple of patents out on using lasers to improve the surface finish of the part as we produce it. And going into the future, my personal opinion is that the market is not so much printing existing parts, but opening up the opportunities for new manufacturing processes and just totally wacky one-off ideas. I've heard Hershey printing chocolates, custom chocolates while you wait. There's a company in China that uses a special concrete blend to actually 3D print the shell of a house, and then you add on the roof and doors and windows. Actually, the market for 3D printers for the hobby world is hugely expanding. It's a great way to introduce high schoolers into math, science, production technologies, and make production cool again.
Great. Gartner predicts that by 2030, vehicles capable of driving autonomously will represent about 25% of the passenger vehicle population in mature markets around the world. How do you see this impacting supply chains, Jonathan?
Well, I agree with Gartner that that figure is certainly plausible. In fact, I would put forth that we might be closer to that number today than what we think. Certainly the idea of a driverless vehicle in industry has been around for a long time, whether it's in heavy industry, AGVs, we know. But we also see a version of the driverless vehicle in hospitals and schools and libraries. Commercial aircraft, you could argue, are driverless vehicles because they are capable of flying themselves en route. Anybody that flew here today, probably a goodly portion of that trip was done with the plane doing the driving. The biggest opportunity in this area, though, is on the long haul, at least for right now. So this would be long haul trucks over the road. You could also see it in rail and potentially even ships. But the key item here is that it is a deliberate dispatch to a predetermined point or points where there are people expecting and awaiting the shipment. And these routes would be regular. To do this with a delivery route, or what I'll call an on-demand route, something that is going to be different every day and pre-programmed, is going to require some infrastructure that we just don't have. It's possible, but we're not there yet. But in order for it to be truly effective, the question that we need to answer with a driverless vehicle in that application is, how do you ultimately get this thing that is on the driverless vehicle into the hands of the person who is expecting it? And think small package delivery. You ordered something from somewhere, you want to get it. If it comes in a vehicle that doesn't have a driver, how's it going to get in your mailbox or on your front doorstep? That's a key piece of information that we need to have figured out before this is going to work.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. Also, Gartner predicts that by 2017, 20% of logistics organizations will be exploiting drones as part of their monitoring, searching, and event management activities. That's only 2 years from now. What's the potential benefits and risk of drone usage in the supply chain, Brian?
I think it's kind of a dichotomy. You have both sides. First off, I think it's cool when you can get on 60 Minutes and drones will fly around and deliver your pizza and stuff like that. But I think, somebody brought up a point yesterday, I think it was you, Bill, said, are we sure that we want to have drones flying around with toxic chemicals delivering different types of medicines and other things like that? I also think there's a risk around personal space and the security of that space and how that information is shared with where you live, what you're buying, and then how that becomes digital. So I think there's going to be, we're going to talk about it a lot in the government, right? Obviously, and that's going to take a while. There'll be regulations, and I think the demands of the consumer are going to continue to push us towards some type of delivery. But I think if you look at the industry overall, the biggest problems we have, this is going to be a solution to some of those problems. We talked about driverless trucks. I mean, that's a big deal. If you can take, a single driver, like we do with a rail car, and say, okay, one engineer is going to move hundreds of tons of product, and you can do that with trucks, and somehow those trucks can follow a single driver, and I picture in my mind 10 trucks behind one, and they're all delivering to a great DC somewhere. Then you can address the issue of we don't have enough drivers except in the local market. The biggest issue that the carriers come back with and talk to us about is quality of life. Quality of life means getting home. So if I can do the long haul without a driver, and then I can focus on the delivery within the local area, I mean, that's a real use that you can say, okay, we can do a lot of those things today. And so I think you're going to see in the driver market, in the automobile, I think it's going to go faster. And I would say it's not going to be decades, it's going to be years before we see that. But then on the airspace and personal space and delivering pizzas, I think we're probably a little bit farther away because you start getting into the security of personal security as well.
Yeah, I think, it's one of those things like all new technologies, when it first comes out, everybody's trying to apply it to everything, and it just doesn't work that way. But there are places that it does work.
Yeah.
George, you make an excellent point. Yeah. 10, 11 years ago, one of the larger retailers in this country introduced radio frequency identification, RFID, package, item, and carton identification. There was a mismatch between the requirements for the proper deployment of that technology and the costs associated with it and the application that had been It was good in many, many ways because it heightened awareness of a new technology that does indeed have applications and is being used gainfully today in a variety of different areas. But the key is to match the cost of the item and the application. If there is a mismatch, keep looking. As Brian suggested earlier, you've got knowledge workers. You need knowledge workers on your supply chain team. And as opposed to trying to find a silver bullet walking this floor, take a look at what's available and be certain that there's a cost-value relationship that enables you to go forward with the technology before you jump off the end of the dock.
Right.
So what should leaders be doing today around these emerging technologies? Art, Bill?
Yes, thanks, Scott. Probably the people who are going to, or organizations that are going to dabble in this sector, in the emerging technologies, they're probably a little bit more forward-thinking and innovative to begin with, and hopefully they have established methodologies and systems to evaluate these technologies. But I will offer, being somewhat systematic in my viewpoint of things, if you really take a 5-step approach to it, let's call the first step investigation, second conceptualizing, third piloting, fourth monitoring, and then finally the implementation. In the first instance, investigate, just dive in. Sounds like Randolph at Boeing, that's a lot of what they do. They dive in, they take time to understand and research these emerging technologies and try to be ahead of the curve. So also enlist, as they've done with Virginia Tech, talk to the academics, talk to consultants, talk to your customers, talk to your suppliers, try to get them all involved in this team effort. Secondly, you've gathered all that information. You're sort of a, let's say, a paper expert, if you will. Take the next stage and conceptualize. Task your team to think about ways that they can implement these technologies within your organization or within your supply chain with your customers. So in the results of that, maybe it fits in with, or they create a 5-year plan. Let's call it a 5-year technology or innovation plan. At that point, you've gained more knowledge. Now it's time to get practical knowledge, and doing a pilot is probably one or a very good way to do it. Take something that looks promising that came out of your conceptual phase and actually create it. If it's a machine, get the machine. Put the processes around it. Try to realize it as much as possible on a smaller scale. Then you're adding the practical experience to your arsenal. But while you're doing that, I mean, this is going to take time, and with emerging technologies, you hear it here in what people are saying. It's emerging. It's going to change, and it's going to change rapidly. And there's going to be more, let's say, knowledge influences that come in, more experiences. 3.0 version of something is going to come out. So you should be monitoring those advancements, because it could make something even more attractive for you to want to implement on the grand scale. And finally, when you're confident that you've looked at it, you've designed something that you feel will function well, and you've got all the experience, go for it. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be hasty. Haste is not a virtue in this case, but I think if you take those steps, your chances of success with emerging type technology is going to be a lot greater.
Great, thanks.
Well, thanks, Art, for telling everybody what I do for a living. I appreciate it. And this just breaks my heart, I'm just going to tell you. But I'm going to have to agree with John. And that's hard for me. That's hard for me.
Better write that down.
I like toys. And we have a big old thing up here that's full of toys and tools. I love them. But I also have a business to run. And I also have to make sure that anything that I do from a tool, technology, toy perspective is really adding value to my business. And maybe it's not the sexiest, coolest thing out there that really adds value to your company. Maybe it's not. But then again, maybe it is. We have to really be careful and cognizant that we don't fall into the new toy syndrome. I do play music on the side. Musicians like toys, okay? Don't fall into that, okay? Don't fall into, look, I have a solution. Where's your problem? Don't fall into that. Look at what really adds value to your business. Understand your business. Understand your business processes. Map them out, maybe on a whiteboard as we talked about. Understand what you need and then find the tool set that will make you, your employees, and your company more profitable. That's really what it's all about. So don't fall into the, I have a solution, where's your problem?
Great, thanks.
Good. Thank you. So we've got all these great technologies, emerging, growing, and mature. But one of the big barriers that was identified in both last year's report and this year's report is the lack of workforce, the lack of people that have the ability or the skill sets. They have lots of people with the ability, but don't necessarily have the skill sets to program, operate, install, design these systems. And in fact, in the roadmap, predicted between now and 2018, there will be 1.4 million jobs created in the supply chain. Yet we don't have the resources to fill them. So my question to the panel, Art and Jonathan, doesn't the innovation we've been talking about further complicate this situation?
Yes. No question. But you know what? I'll say this. It's probably not much different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. I think there's always been a shortage of good talent available, to the supply chain discipline. So it's nothing new. It's nothing the government's going to solve. We're just going to have to attack it on different levels and try to be as aggressive as possible. MHI is doing great things right now, trying to stimulate more interest amongst college students and try to bring them into the fold. I was just talking to one of my colleagues yesterday, and he was telling me how difficult it was to hire an industrial engineer. It's tough. It's real. It's out there. I will make a suggestion. I think one thing you can do as an organization, you've heard some of the things that Boeing has done, for example, reaching out and trying to mentor students. Another approach is to try to, I would say most companies have a innovative streak in it. And people naturally want to innovate. Some people more than others, but it's inherent within your organization. It's just a matter of bringing it out. You can also, if you go after that and seriously make an attempt to fashion your company as innovative, I think that will go a long way to draw the talent that you need. People, and I've been lucky, I've worked in 2 organizations, US Foods being one of them, that puts a real strong emphasis on innovation. And you'd say a food company that does that, but yes, even a food distributor food service distributor does that. And it's been exciting for me to work in that environment, and I see the energy within the organization as well. So that will attract people to your organization.
Yeah, that's a true statement. We've got a stigma in the supply chain industry that it's not a very glamorous industry to go into, and we as today's leaders need to work very hard to change that stigma. We need to do that by getting our challenges out in front of the STEM community now and showing them that there are some very real, very cool, very interesting things that we need to solve and start to attract the best and brightest to the industry to solve them, not only now, but in the future. As we continue to get that interest out there, it's the only way that we're going to have a renewable workforce. We need to start by defining the roles. What are the roles that we're going to need tomorrow's people to fill? I don't even think we know what that is today, but we better figure it out pretty fast. One of my favorite quotes from the creation of the U.S. roadmap was, we need to show that this is a technology-driven industry, not a truck-driving industry.
Yeah.
We change that mode of thinking, and we'll be headed down the right path.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another thing, another statistic that was in that report was the median income was $78,000 a year. So these aren't low-paying jobs either. And Art, I appreciate the plug. I got to add on to that just a little bit. Today, actually, we're having a workforce summit here. We'll have close to 500 technical, junior college, and college students here today with sessions, different learning sessions for them and tours of the floor. And then tomorrow they will actually be going out and going on site visits and actually seeing applications. So we're really excited about that. This is the second year, well, it's the first year of the summit, but for the last 3 shows, the growth in student participation has been really encouraging.
It's been dramatic, George. May I
Please
ask a question? How many of you would like to see your son or daughter or grandchild go to work in a warehouse? This is an audience participation exercise along Bill's lines.
We had one out there.
That's telling, isn't it?
Well, he owns the warehouse, clearly.
Exactly. That's true. No, but that's the challenge we have. We need to get excited about the environment in which we live, work, breathe, eat, produce. If we're going to bring the next generation, whether they're millennials or whatever comes after them, into our world. And our world is exciting. That's why some of us have been here so long.
Right. So, just adding on to that a little bit, what steps should the industry take to attract the right people with the skill sets that are needed to drive this innovation? Greg, could you have an opinion?
I do. In the last, I think in the last 10 years, it seems like you're either on one side or the other of this massive move in e-commerce and globalization. It's either you're writing code or you're working in the supply chain. And I don't know why you guys could say this isn't a glamorous and sexy job, because just look at the panel. Come on.
Love it.
Eye candy, pure eye candy, brother.
Eye candy. I mean, I feel like it right here. No, and I think it's just incredibly important, the energy that we put into attracting talent. When I look at I know some folks up on this panel because we've talked, and some of the things that we're doing at La-Z-Boy, we're looking at the role very differently and thinking of it as a holistic approach to innovation. And we aren't calling it product development as much as we are value chain innovation. So really looking at the entire value chain. And when we bring young people in, I think whoever mentioned the STEM programs and reaching out to high schools and communities and colleges and universities. I know all these guys, and I know many of us have been speakers at universities or high schools and go in and teach at classes, or at least help kids understand how important the math and sciences and the technology sides of their education are. And I think that's a key piece of helping attract people long term, is starting young and then keeping universities and everyone engaged in how attractive these jobs are with the opportunity for income. And then just, it really is a math and science and technology-based kind of industry. And it's not trucks and just moving products and touching them. It's really about the analytics behind all that and the inbound orders and the demand signals and the predictive analytics. There's so many great things to get into, and they expand your mind. And I think that's the key, is that a lot of young people that we've brought into different programs, I think the key is to attract them and then hire them, hire great people that fit your organization. And then I say, instead of just mentor, it's mentor, guide, and protect them as they manage their career. I have a couple examples, and one of my old bosses happens to be sitting next to me here, but he did a great job of really helping our organization create a roadmap for how our careers would work. And I feel very fortunate to have done that, where you started in supply chain, worked in sales and marketing, moved back into engineering, I guess, because I started as an engineer out of Purdue, and then came back to R&D, actually, after 10 or 15 years in supply chain. So gave you an incredible breadth of knowledge of the business. Supply chain touches everything from the cash-to-cash cycle to moving it and delivery to the consumer. So it's a fantastic industry to really be excited about. And I think that's why companies are starting to try to change the language around it and really allow those jobs to get expansive instead of reductive. It's not just about risk mitigation and moving a part from here to there. It's all the stuff that goes on to make things happen and to move goods through companies and really understand how companies make money.
Right. And just to add on a little bit, that our industry literally does touch everything, and those skill sets go across the board.
They do.
And as a good example, most of the members up here on this board have been in different industries, but those skill sets are the same skill sets you need for every industry. So it really is an exciting industry. I'm a little biased, but
it is.
So what are the most critical competencies for the future supply chain workforce? Bill and Brian, why don't you give us a little of your thoughts?
I'll start. So let me ask you guys a question. When you do an interview for a new employee, everybody has their standard 10 questions, right? Nod, stay with me. Starbucks was open, work with me here. Okay? Everybody has their favorite question. And that's the question that really helps you make that decision. And so this is mine. So I'm going to ask the question, and I just want you to randomly call out your answer, okay? So let's say that you're given a task to do, and you don't know how to do it. What do you do?
Google it.
All good answers. All good answers. But the one answer that I got at an interview that caused me an immediate hire, I asked the question, you're given a task to do, you don't know how to do it, what do you do? The answer was quite simply, I'll let you know if it ever happens. You're hired. My point behind all that is when we're talking about skills, competencies, and things that people need to know how to do, we don't know. Look what the supply chain, how things have changed from the record store to iTunes. We don't know. We don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years. I can't say you need to be a super STEM guy, though it's certainly not going to hurt. I can't tell you that you need to understand all the new analytics and inventory optimization programs and be able to write code and write algorithms that can figure out every answer. I can't tell you that because I don't know in 5 years if that's what we're going to need or that's what we're going to not. But I will tell you this. I do need people that have the ability to think. Don't tell me what was in the book that you read in college. Don't tell me this is the standard process, because the standard process is done the day you take that test. The world's changing just that fast. We need people in my industry that can think, that can problem solve, that can look at a situation and find a better way to do it, and then have the ability to communicate that to me so that we can make it happen. That's really what I think we need.
I love listening to Bill. Last
I am
night,
somewhat of a
he was
lid.
talking about innovation last night, and he was telling us about his football playing days and how he felt that because Joe Namath was the greatest quarterback, he wore pantyhose And I'm like, wow, that has got to come out tomorrow. I mean,
Once again, eye candy. I'm here for the eye
all
candy.
about innovation. I agree with Bill. I think the most important thing we can do as leaders from a competency perspective is give our teams a broad skill set. If you try to pigeonhole someone, first off, that person's going to become frustrated with their job and they're probably going to leave. But if you give them the breadth, they're going to be able to learn to think. And I think thinking is what we're going to need because the problems continue to expand. When I speak at colleges, I always say, first thing you need to do, they always ask the question, what's the best advice, the one piece you should give us? And I tell them, rent your house. And they go, why would you say that? I said, because if you're in the supply chain, you're going to be on the move. You might have to move to Singapore tomorrow and to Berlin the next year, and you're going to have to learn about manufacturing. You're going to have to learn about supply chain. You're going to have to buy things in China. You're going to have to somehow assemble them somewhere. And I think it's so important for us to allow people to learn in a world that's extremely complex. Our education system has to help them learn how to learn and to soak things in. I always tell, the second thing I tell them is, this is the slowest day of the rest of your life. And if you look up in that show, I think we're all in the same space of, this is the slowest day of the rest of our life. It's only going to go faster. They're only going to be more demanding, the customers, and we're going to have to find solutions for them. So I just think learning and continuing to broaden that skill set of supply chain, it is the organization. It is the way companies make money and the way they lose if they don't figure it out.
John, so how should workforce challenges be addressed?
I don't wear pantyhose,
That's a problem.
but I do have a bad habit. And I've walked a lot of factory floors and warehouses over the years. And I find that I've learned more, and I'm talking now about the people on the floor who are actually doing the work. I've learned more on a 15-minute smoke break outdoors than I have in 2 or 3 or 4 hours in a conference room with middle or senior level management. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate with your team today. That's point number one, and if I may, one other, George. Think about tuning the workplace environment to match the workforce that you have today, to excite them, to get them encouraged, to get them participating in meeting the goals that you've established. But also think about tuning that workplace environment for the workforce you not only expect to have, but hope to have in the future.
Thank you. Okay, so what should leaders be doing today regarding the workforce challenge? Randolph, Art, could you give us your input?
Sure. So it's been discussed, Boeing is a great company to work for. It's exciting. We've got aerospace, space, and beyond. But when young leaders come out of college, they also look at the high-tech industry and those high East Coast and West Coast salaries. So we've still got a recruiting problem. And the studies I've seen say that if you want to get kids interested, you've actually got to start early at the high school and even junior high school level. So with a workforce of 107,000 people, we can afford to take a large-scale approach to this. So we've got a lot of funding in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We're active in the FIRST robotics program to introduce high schoolers to high tech. We even sponsor a space camp in the US and in Turkey to interest students in aerospace and train educators.
I want to go to that.
With the U.S. Material Handling Logistics Roadmap, you mentioned the roundtables, and one of the youngest members of the roundtable was actually one of my interns out of University of Missouri Columbia, a guy named Jason Robke, who's actually written up by Sarah Spector in the MHI website. And we found that our interaction with organizations such as the CELDI organization, Center for Excellence in Logistics and Distribution, which Jason Robke was involved with and came to Boeing through as an intern, is actually a really good conduit because we get people interested in the company early in their college careers. Working at Boeing as an intern is a great way to bring people up to speed. So when you have someone join the company, they hit the ground running. And I think the greatest thing with this example is we've come full circle. Jason's graduating in June and will now be joining the Boeing company and working closely with me as a full employee.
He's going to work with you?
Aha.
Wow. Actually,
thinks he's
Jason and I
excited
worked
about
together on a couple of CELDI projects. He's a really good guy, so congratulations.
Thanks
for giving him the spot. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that came out of the report talked about companies that fail to embrace the innovations and technologies are really going to struggle in the future. And, you know, I think that's a very important point. So companies have to build the capabilities to evaluate and run these innovations and technologies through their organization. And I think the rate of change and innovation is only going to increase more as we proceed. And a company has to have, as a, let's call it a core competency, the ability to look at these things and drive it through. You need all sorts of different types of people with different personalities and different interests to really run a good organization. But I will say probably some of the most valuable people will be the ones that are not necessarily technical experts, but know how to bring groups and people together and drive, let's say, solutions. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a premium going on in the future. So that has to be a focus going forward.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Art. So, you know, what should companies do to make it happen? I think people should be taking a kind of longer-term view, say 3 to 5 years out at your supply chains. Focus on your customer needs first. I think, as was mentioned on the panel, try to solve a business problem rather than trying to kind of look at a technology and try to see where it fits. And there's a lot of discussion about the workforce, but I quite frankly think that all of us need to elevate our game. I mean, supply chains are going from reactive to predictive, right? There is just an avalanche of data out there that we need to learn how to analyze and use all the kind of new and emerging analytic tools. And there's just a ton of new solutions that are out there that we just need to educate ourselves. So besides what everybody else said about kind of the workforce, I think we in this room and in the industry need to up our game as well too. So thank you for the time today. And George, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you. We have got a couple minutes here for questions. If anybody has any questions. I know we're getting close to opening the show, so everybody's probably anxious, but if we do, if anybody's got a question.
Languages. If they travel from New York to Berlin and they have there do the technicians, I can tell you it's most of the time, so 99%, it's an English language. That's not a problem. But if you meet the people on the road, and I think George can confirm that, you try to speak in Singapore in English sometimes. They know what the hell what you're talking about. Yeah. Do this in Germany. Yeah. And actually, I'm from an age, they will never talk to you in English. They do it in German. Come to France, you learn something. You learn French. If you don't do it, go back home. So that is what I miss here. We are an international active group in the material handling, and then we don't see it.
No, I
Come
agree.
on.
I had the first supply chain deal I ever did in Asia. I had been on a plane. We had been delayed because of weather. I was there for 32 hours. I got to a shabi-shabi restaurant in Tokyo at 2 a.m. Gentleman was there from Japan. Nobody spoke English. I didn't speak any Japanese, but he had spent some time in Brazil. I speak Portuguese, and we did that deal at 2 a.m. in a shabi-shabi restaurant in Tokyo in Portuguese.
Right, and I will say, I think one of the areas in our educational system that they are doing a better job than when I was coming up is they are teaching languages. For example, my son, who happens to be here today, he speaks Spanish and Chinese. So I think they're doing a good job of that. The communication thing, I think, will be better from that standpoint. So, yes?
That's a good point.
Part of your supply chain. The education system is part of your supply chain, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I just wondered along those lines, how do you collaborate with the colleges and the universities to help them provide what you need and help them change their curriculum, and what changes do you see coming up in the education system?
Oh, me. Can I answer?
Please, Bill.
You're exactly right, because we, business people, need to make sure that the folks that are coming out of school, whether it's high school or junior college or four-year degree or master's degree or whatever, know what we need them to know. Interview. I was going through an interview with somebody with an MBA just right out of college. We talked about our culture. One of the questions they asked me, do you guys have a pajama day? I think that she might have had a little bit different expectation than I did for an interview. So we integrate with all of the education systems in our areas, whatever site it is. We work with our high schools, we work with our JUCOs, we work with our trade schools, we work with our colleges, and we integrate with them. I'm actually working with the school district in Kansas City now to integrate business into the education system, to walk in there and say, this is what we need, let me help you. That's a bad quote from a bad movie. Let me help you divide or figure out your curriculum, so that when that kid comes out of high school or JUCO or four-year or whatever, he actually has some skills that I need. And maybe that's the possibility of integrating some certifications, APICS or PMI or whatever, into the education system to give that skill set so they can speak the language. But we can't sit back and go, oh, the education system's not giving me what I need.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We have to be proactive and go to them and say, let me tell you what we need. Let me help you.
Our firm, I'm sure a lot of companies are investing in, we invest in supply chain universities with time. We teach courses. To your point, we work with around the curriculum. I think it's incumbent upon everybody to invest in those universities to make sure they are properly prepared when they come out. So, and analytics is a great example in terms of we need to invest in that area in the universities to get people better prepared to be in industry.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that MHI has been working with a group called the College Industry Council on Material Handling Education since 1951. They'll be here today, along with representatives of any number of different 50 or 60 regional consuls looking to marry business and academia for the supply chain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and MHI, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the Education Foundation, and there's a lot of effort being put into collaborating with the technical schools, as well as we've done a good job for over 30 years in giving out scholarships to juniors and seniors in college and some of the master's programs, but we're going further down into the high school level to create awareness and develop programs for those young people. Yes, one more question, then we got to.
So I wanted to say thank you. I learned a lot this morning, and really great panel. But one thing I noticed as I look at the panel, I don't see any real diversity. What do you?
We
what are your
didn't
thoughts?
either. You're right.
So we were
Right.
Why do you think I wore my pantyhose? You know?
Well, that is a form of diversity, but I guess my question is that a major weakness of our industry currently, number one, and then number two, what are some innovative thoughts of how we can address that in the future?
I would say that you're absolutely right. But what I would tell you is if you go below, let's say, the director level, our industry is extremely diverse. I think we as leaders have to figure out how to raise those folks who are in the base parts of our organization into leadership roles, because we just don't have the perspectives necessary to deal with all of the issues that are out there. And I think when you think about the female element of, I mean, let's face it, 70% of everything that's purchased in America is purchased by women, and our industry has less than 10% of females in executive positions. So it's a huge area of opportunity, and I think as we start to apply our, we need to get out of our pig-headed white male world and say, these folks are buying the products, we need them to help us do that. That's a bad way to say it, but I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I would
I'd go
add,
back.
just the good news is we have a group called the YPN, Young Professional Network, and I don't know what the exact percentage is, but the percentage of women and diversity in that group is significantly higher than what we've got now, which is, so it's encouraging. We are getting the message out, and they're recognizing women are really smart, so they realize all these great opportunities.
Way smarter than us.
They're a
Yes,
lot
they
smarter
are.
than we are. Right. They see it now that it's not, you know. Bill, were you going to say something?
I was going to tell a joke, but I think you did it for me. So.
Okay, I think we've got to wrap it up with that. I just want to thank all of you for coming today. And don't forget, this afternoon, we've got at 4:30, we've got a 70th anniversary celebration with some networking and just kind of relaxing and have some fun. And we've got Frank Caliendo who's going to entertain us and give us a few laughs. So again, to the panel, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. And everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.